So, Jason, Reza Jorjani, welcome to the show.
Great to be on your show, Laurence. Thank you for the invitation.
I've really been looking forward to this conversation, Jason. Your work is just so interesting and so vast, and heads off in so many directions that it was difficult for me to try and pick a topic to contain this conversation. But I think I have, and I look forward to seeing how this develops. So let's just dive straight in. I think you're the author of Prometheism, which is a book that presents an alternative vision to this dystopian future that's being rammed down our throats by, all the usual suspects, the WEF, Klaus Schwab, Prince Charles, even. But before we get into the main ideas in Prometheus, I'd like to talk a little bit about what your thoughts are on this future that is being presented to us, because I know we're at the threshold of a technological revolution that threatens to completely transform our understanding of our reality, but also, of humanity as a species. And we hear lots of dark conversations and discourse on things like transhumanism, and all these other technological advancements, they call them, and eugenics and all this kind of stuff. And it seems to be totally inevitable that it's happening and that we need to deal with it, and this is the way it is. Can you give us your insight on your analysis of these people who are, projecting these dark dystopian narratives?
Yeah. It's a lot more complicated than I think people both on the left and on the right perceive it to be. Namely, the situation that we find ourselves in, that is often labeled a push for globalism or a technocratic state and so forth. It's more complicated because although it seems as if we're being pushed toward some kind of cybernetic and thoroughly technocratic society, right? Some form of global management that's going to be soullessly technocratic, not to say technological. I actually think that what's going on is that a dialectic is being set in motion where certain processes are being used to deconstruct society and to promote a soulless, mechanistic approach to governance for the sake of catalyzing a backlash that's regressively traditionalist. So, for example, you mentioned Prince Charles. And I, at one point, knew people who knew him. And from what I hear, he's a disciple of Rene Guénon. Rene Guénon was the leading traditionalist thinker of the early 20th century, who then had Julius Evola as a kind of successor to him. And Rene Guénon had this conception of modernity unfolding in two phases: a very mechanistic, materialistic phase that's represented by like the rationalism of the French Revolution, and then subsequently a phase that involves, more occult and New Age ideas, but of taking a scientific approach toward those ideas. And Rene Guénon was utterly horrified by this potential for developing a kind of radically empiricist scientific understanding of phenomena that conventionally have been within the purview of religious belief and major religious institutions. He thought that this kind of ultra-humanism was satanic. And so he advocated a return to tradition. And in particular, this traditionalist school that he founded had as a core belief that all of the so-called great world religions, including Islam, to which Guénon himself converted toward the end of his life, that all these so-called great world religions share certain core truths, and they're all different refractions and expressions of one primordial and unchanging wisdom. And he thought that we needed to go back to a traditional society structured around these principles, and that we should basically reject modern technology and the way in which it's revolutionized society. He thought that that was degenerate, the way in which, modern science and technology have fundamentally transformed human society. So Prince Charles, for example, is an adherent of that school of thought, whether he likes to say so publicly or not. If you look at the devil's in the detail, well, the devil actually isn't who's in the details, but the traditionalist God is there in between the lines of the various speeches that he gives and so forth. And so you see people like him, and then you see these Klaus Schwab types who have a much more technocratic vision of reorganizing the world. Some of the people also who are managing the whole COVID-19 pandemic, like Bill Gates, this very technocratic vision of reorganizing the world. And I think what's going on is that these are two polarities in a dialectical machination that is ultimately aiming to establish a totalitarian control system on this planet that's essentially neo-feudal in nature, where we have a new feudal lordship, and they're going to get to have a monopoly on these singularity level technologies like genetic engineering, nanotech, robotics, and so forth. They will keep that for themselves with a kind of autonomous industry that they develop. And then the rest of us are going to be reduced back to feudal serfdom and be given this traditionalist religious system to believe in.
Would that be the species would split? You know, you would have these so-called genetically modified, genetically advanced humans that sit at the top of the feudal pile, and then you have just plain old humanity is left behind as the peasantry. Is that part of this mechanistic worldview that we've touched upon?
Yes. It involves a concept known as the Breakaway civilization. And this is an idea that, or a concept that was put forth by a number of different authors. Richard Dolan, Walter Bosley, Joseph Farrell. These are all people who've written about the Breakaway civilization. I've developed a philosophical concept on the basis of it, or rather, I should say, I have attempted to reverse engineer from, the phenomenon as we see it, the concept that these people must be working from when they're unfolding these plans. And I mean, I was going to get into a conversation of this later in the context of my, Prometheism, but it makes sense to broach the subject now. I call this a destructive departure in worldview warfare. And that's actually a translation from a German term that to me makes more sense. Abbauender Aufbruch im Weltanschauungskrieg. Abbau, it comes from the verb bauen, or to build in German. And ab is a sort of a privative. It's an un or dis. So it's dismantling and unbuilding or dismantling, deconstruction. And it has everything to do with the ideas of deconstruction that postmodern thinkers developed from out of Martin Heidegger. So it's a dismantling or deconstruction based on an Aufbruch. An Aufbruch is a breakthrough or departure. So it's like some catastrophic discovery, like, for example, nuclear fission, right? Nuclear fission is an Aufbruch. It's a catastrophic breakthrough that breaks us out from business as usual and the way society is conventionally organized. Because, of course, in the case of nuclear fission, it threatened us with global thermonuclear war, right? And that's just the first of a series of technologies that have this Aufbruch potential, like genetic engineering and, turning man into some entirely different species, cybernetics, nanotechnology. These all have that Aufbruch potential. And later we can talk about zero-point energy and how I think that's an epitomizing case of this. So you have this deconstructive departure, meaning, in other words, there is this breakthrough that takes place scientifically, technologically among the elites. And on the basis of that breakthrough, they wind up in a position where they can break down or deconstruct our various societies, having put themselves in a position above and beyond all of the extant societies of the world. And then that last element in the concept, Abbauen der Aufbruch im Weltanschauungskrieg. Weltanschauungskrieg was translated as psychological warfare by the American military when they went into Germany in 1945. But psychological warfare is a really poor translation because in German, Weltanschauung means the way the world shows itself. And it goes to a deep understanding of the inextricability of consciousness from the way that the world manifests, and how physical reality, quote unquote, is dependent upon the deep structure of our consciousness, also and especially at the level of the collective unconscious. So, Weltanschauungskrieg is worldview Krieg or warfare, worldview warfare, insofar as it's actually a conflict between various societies at the level of determining the nature of reality. Heidegger called it the worldhood of the world. What makes the world of a certain people hang together? What are the hinge propositions, as Wittgenstein said, that make all of the other propositions that structure a society viable and that condition the thought patterns of people in that society, from childhood onwards? What basically limits what they think is even possible? What can even happen, right? And so these people, this elite, have understood the nature of worldview warfare. They have managed to achieve certain technological scientific breakthroughs, which have put them in a position where they can engage in the use of deconstruction to break down our societies and reorganize them in a way that allows them to dominate through worldview warfare, themselves not being bound by one or another particular ideology, but being in a position to manipulate people's frames of interpretation and perception in order to basically keep us down, oppress us, deprive us of knowledge, maintain our ignorance, and be in a position of manipulative control themselves. And so that's, I think, the concept on the basis of which people like the Klaus Schwabs of the world and, the Bill Gateses and the Prince Charleses are operating.
Total revolution.
Well, in a very negative sense, yes.
Yeah. And I know you talked. I mean, that's quite a really deep philosophical explanation of the wider game that's happening above us. But can you maybe talk a little bit more about the mechanistic worldview? Because recently I've been chatting to a psychologist called Matthias Desmet, and he talks a lot about the mechanistic worldview, and it traces it back from the Enlightenment, traces it through history, and as we've tumbled through, as man has become more and more detached from nature, from the source, from the essence, from God, if you like, is that where we're at now is a logical conclusion of the Enlightenment, which, it doesn't seem to be enlightening many people in reality, but it's the logical conclusion, including what's happened with COVID and this totalitarian push that we're seeing, as part of a global empire. Could you elaborate a little bit on this whole idea of the mechanistic worldview?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to make a number of rather bold claims here, and people who want to see the argumentation behind it should look at my first book, Prometheus and Atlas. In particular, there's a whole chapter called Reason and Terror, which is about the rationalism during the age of the terror of the French Revolution, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you look at the life of René Descartes, who's supposedly the founder of modern science and, the great paragon of the age of enlightenment, the first great Enlightenment thinker, you see that René Descartes was an agent of the Holy Inquisition. He was a Jesuit intelligence agent. And his specific purpose was to set up a scientific paradigm that would reinforce the power of the church and at the same time promote a entirely soulless, mechanistic, materialist science, right? Now think
which is counter to what the church is teaching, isn't it?
Yeah, but see, here's the thing. Again, it's a question of a dialectic. Okay. So in the generation or two before Descartes, we had people like Giordano Bruno in the Renaissance, in the High Renaissance. We had people like Bruno coming out and approaching matters that were conventionally circumscribed by church theology in an entirely empiricist manner, right? For someone like Giordano Bruno, alchemy meant giving man power over nature, including human nature. All questions to Bruno's mind were approached scientifically or technologically in the sense of craft, though. Craft like, the masters of the craft. Mm-hmm. The way that, the Masonic orders use the term craft or witchcraft, right? Okay. So there was nothing outside the scope of scientific inquiry. And Bruno had all kinds of theories about reincarnation, okay, or metempsychosis, as the Greeks called it. He believed that there were other intelligent species in the universe, and so on and so forth. And the church felt fundamentally threatened by the prospect that you would have a rise of a kind of humanism that did not recognize any question as being exclusively religious, or any question as being off limits to science. Everything, including the nature of the human soul, and what else might be out there in the cosmos, in the heavens, as they used to say, is a legitimate question for science, okay, and is something that can be impacted by technological development. So they were fundamentally threatened by this, and what they needed to do was they need to find a way to limit the power of science's inquiry, to limit the scientific world picture. So they had this Descartes character come out and basically lay the groundwork for an entirely mechanistic, reductionist, materialist account of the physical world, including the physical body of the human being. All right, this is Descartes' account of the world as res extensa, extended substance. And then have this completely dissociated mental substance, which we can't really know anything about, other than that we do have an immortal soul. And if we want to have any, I don't even want to say knowledge about it. If we want to somehow engage with that, well, the church has all the answers. Okay? And also notice it's a psyop in the sense that if you tell people that they're living in an entirely mechanistic universe where they have no free will because, like Laplace put it, it's all deterministic, right? From the moment of the Big Bang, you could basically determine the whole chain of causality. Well, then, people are going to feel like life has absolutely no meaning, and they're going to be in a state of hopelessness and despair. So that what are they going to do? They're going to run right back into the arms of the church, who tells them that free will is a miracle that God gave them, right? And that this mechanistic world picture is just a reflection of the inherent limitations of science. So you see, Descartes set up a kind of science that was then going to reinforce the power of the church. And we have this schizophrenic split in our civilization from that point onward, which was characteristic of the whole Age of Enlightenment. That's, as I see it, what went on there.
Would you see that the transhumanist movement is the zenith of the mechanistic worldview? Can the transhumanist movement exist without because what's that guy's name? Nouri Harari, the Israeli philosopher.
Noah Harari, yeah.
Yeah, isn't he saying there's no such thing as free will, and that this age of humans having an idea of a soul and individualism, that's all coming to an end with this great reset and the transhumanist agenda? We better just get used to it.
Right. So look, I'm not one for being conciliatory at the expense of clarity. So let me go ahead and say this. I'm a transhumanist. Mm-hmm. But not at all in the sense of these materialistic, mechanistic transhumanists. Your description is entirely accurate when it comes to 95% of the people who call themselves transhumanists today, the Ray Kurzweil type, transhumanists, Harari, as you mentioned, these people, they are the entirely predictable outcome of that mechanistic, materialistic trajectory set up by Descartes, that La Mettrie continued, that Marquis de Sade epitomized in his fictional writings. That's the outcome of it, absolutely. The reason I say I'm a transhumanist is because I do embrace the transformative potential for the transformative potential of singularity level technologies like genetic engineering to, let's say, eliminate all hereditary diseases, to increase human IQ, cognitive ability, right? I embrace the potential of nanotechnology to create a fully autonomous industry that would provide us with an economy of abundance where there would be no poverty left. I support robotics. I don't see why in 20 years there should be any drudgery left. Every form of human labor that's unimaginative and uncreative can be carried out by robotics and other automated systems. So these are, in a way, transhumanist ideas because they would so revolutionize the form of human life that what we would have on the other side of it is not really humanity as we've conventionally conceived of it. Because look, all human societies have had exploitative labor. There's been mass poverty. disease, is a facet of the human, quote, human condition, unquote. So revolutionizing the human condition in a positive way is transhumanist. But I'm very different from these materialist transhumanists insofar as I recognize all the data from parapsychology that shows that we have tremendous psychic abilities that have been allowed to atrophy, that we can cultivate these latent abilities, which, by the way, we share with a lot of other animals. Animals are a lot more psychic than we are. Most animals are. And so I totally reject the reductionistic materialism and mechanism of these transhumanists. And I think that maybe the most important element of transcending mere humanity and achieving a kind of superhuman state, as Nietzsche would put it, becoming the Übermensch of the future, is to actually develop the latent psychic abilities of humanity. But see, and we
do you think that's that's a good definition of the Übermensch, because it's such a lofty ideal, it's such a controversial subject, but yet it seems to kind of dominate discourse at a ethereal level. This idea of the Superman, the Übermensch. I mean, what is that to you?
Okay, so this goes to my concept of the spectral revolution. This is an idea that I devoted a whole chapter to in Prometheus and Atlas, and then I come back to it in the book Prometheism. And the spectral revolution, in a nutshell, is the idea that, okay, it's got three dimensions to it that have to do with, the meanings of the word spectral. Trust me, I'm coming around to answering the question of the Übermensch.
Okay.
I have to lay this out. So the three dimensions of the word spectral are that, first of all, it involves the spectrum, right? Like the light spectrum, the spectrum of light. And this is the idea that there are no inherent binary oppositions or sharp distinctions in nature. We create those for practical purposes, like the dichotomy between light and darkness, matter and energy, male and female, all of these dichotomies, that we have in nature are really created for us for practical purposes. And they're very useful, but they're not ontologically intrinsic. And so there's a spectrality to nature. And then the spectrality of nature also involves the future, right? Spectral also has to do with what is yet to come. This is the sense in which Marx uses the term. The specter of communism, the taunting Europe. So there's a futural character to existence itself. In other words, time flows forward into the future, right? Traditional societies always had a cyclical conception of time. And one of the things that I think positively developed in modernity, coming from out of the Renaissance, is a futural sense of time, that the future is in some sense meaningfully greater than the past and involves development. It's a whole idea of progress, basically, that evolution is a cosmic force that's reflected in human progress. Not that progress is linear, there's lots of regresses, but overall there's a trajectory of progress. That's a second sense of spectral. And then the third sense of spectral is a ghost, a ghost or spirit. And here I argue that technological science, which is the motor that moves us forward into the future and that helps us to embody this spectral force of evolution, and also the same technological science that shows us that these binaries that we set up for practical purposes are just that they're pragmatic. That technological science expresses a spirit. It is a force that in a way is possessing us. It has a daemonic power. And in particular, the spirit that it is that of Prometheus. So there is this archetype of Prometheus, which is inspiring technological scientific development and that is responsible for the dominance of Western civilization in the world. Okay, and so when you talk about the Übermensch and becoming the Übermensch is a question of embodying this Promethean spirit or essence of technology that hitherto has only unconsciously moved us. We've been like sleepwalkers, demonically possessed by it. And so what I'm calling for is for us to become conscious of it so that we can have more control over the way in which it can constructively reorganize society. So not to be at the mercy of the Frankenstein's monster, right? Because remember, Prometheus, the modern Prometheus, that was Shelley's alternate title for Frankenstein. So not to be at the mercy of the mindless Frankenstein's monster, but to, embody all of those positive qualities of Prometheus as, the deity of forethought, the creator of humanity, the rebel against tyranny, right? The martyr for freedom, all of these positive qualities of Prometheus. Embodying those is becoming the Ubermensch who is able to successfully navigate what I call the spectral revolution, which is a revolution beyond this mechanistic materialist science and also beyond all this religious dogmatism that has a dialectical relationship with it.
Oh, okay. So I think that kind of is a nice segue into maybe talking in more detail about Prometheism and because you present this book, you present this thesis, this manifesto, if you like, as an alternative vision, as a different route for man to, take rather than this dark dystopian vision that we're presented with. So I know it's a complicated thesis. Well, at least the book that preceded that, which was Prometheism and Atlas. And in some ways, Prometheism is a way to, make that more palatable for the layman, maybe. Yeah. So I was hoping that you could, give us a summary of Prometheism as as a concept.
So I've already touched on a couple of the fundamental concepts involved here. The first one that we got into was destructive departure in worldview warfare. And that's basically my understanding of what the elites are doing now. That's
worldview warfare, yeah.
Yeah, destructive departure, meaning a deconstructive breakthrough, a breakthrough on their part that allows them to deconstruct us, right? And to become masters of worldview warfare. Psychological warfare in the deepest sense. See, psychological warfare is wrong because it presumes that the psyche is separate from an objectively existent world, and that when you're screwing with people's heads, you're screwing with their perception of an objectively existent reality.
Because that's what it feels like. We are in one constant psyop after another. It means they are rolling out one after another, the multiple threads and multiple strands, and reality is just so completely and utterly false and fake. And is there somebody in an office somewhere, manufacturing these narratives and inserting them into society? Is there people who are experts at this?
Short answer, yeah, there certainly are and have been, for decades. And I think that concretely speaking, it has a lot to do with how many thousands of Nazi scientists we imported from 1945 to 1947, people who were already masters of doing things like this. And people think it was just rocket scientists. It wasn't. It was hundreds of psychologists, biologists, all kinds of people, systems theorists, and so forth. Okay,
and this was Operation Paperclip.
Yeah, the Anglo-American elite, basically harvested all of these people, and they became foundational to the Five Eyes, military industrial intelligence complex. People call it the American military, but it's the whole Anglosphere. It's the Anglosphere. And we imported all these people. And you think that's not going to have consequences? Anyway, but going back to Prometheism and how it addresses this. So I touched on the idea of the spectral revolution. Another way to look at, the spectral revolution is in terms of a concept that I call being bound for freedom. And like the spectral revolution, it's also a polyvalent concept. It has more than one level of meaning. So being bound for freedom on an ontological level, in terms of the nature of reality or in terms of the theory of knowledge, epistemology, being bound for freedom means the way you have to conceive of being or existence in order for there to be free will. So very long story short, there are certain accounts of the nature of reality that don't allow for free will. They can be materialist accounts or they can be theological accounts. Like if you have an omniscient and omnipotent God, forget it. Forget free will. And don't tell me like St. Augustine does that it's a miracle given by God, okay? It's a load of crap. If you want free will, you have to have a finite conception of being. It can't be that you have this completed totality that is eternally the way that it is. And just because we're limited finite beings, we have a limited perception of an already completed whole. Any account of the world like that, whether it's scientific or religious, is not going to leave you with any human agency and self-determination. Okay, so there's an ontological and epistemological level to being bound for freedom. What account of existence leaves you with some kind of free will and self-determination? Then there's being bound for freedom in a historical or teleological sense, meaning that we can see through the history of revolutions and through the various restructurings of society, from the Roman Empire and the Spartan slave revolt and so on and so forth, all the way to the French Revolution, and then to the modern revolutions, communist revolution in Russia, so on and so forth, that there is this struggle for freedom throughout the course of human history on a socio-political level. And on average, on the whole, there is an increase of human freedom. I mean, if we really want to compare ourselves to, what it was like to live as a denizen of ancient Assyria, or in the pharaonic state of Egypt, right? We definitely have more freedom. Even the Roman citizens certainly had more freedom than people in those societies. So there is this trajectory of progressively increasing freedom, being bound for freedom in that sense. And then finally, being bound for freedom references again Prometheus and Prometheus's willingness to be bound, to be chained to the Caucasus by Zeus as a punishment for his rebelling on behalf of humanity, for his stealing the fire of the forge of technological science from Olympus and gifting it to his creation, namely mankind, so that we could determine our own lives and not need to be in servile obedience to these gods anymore. For that, Prometheus was bound. And so being bound for freedom also signifies the willingness for self-sacrifice and martyrdom that you saw, in the leaders of the American Revolution, for example, when they said we stake our freedom and our lives and our property on this cause, right? And so there's that sense of being bound for freedom. And that's another integral concept of Prometheism. I can continue, but do you want to interject anything before I continue to lay out?
Yeah, I think. Can we talk a little bit more about Prometheism, Prometheus, the myth, the character? I mean, why is he so important to this narrative? What is it you've chosen about Prometheus? And I've heard there's allegories and connections that he may be Lucifer in Christian doctrine. I mean, can we go into a little bit more detail about the legend and the myth?
Absolutely. So Prometheus is a very unusual deity, if you want to even call him that. Very unusual, bizarre, okay? Because Prometheus is a Titan. And so you have this setup of the gods and the Titans. And you see this, by the way, in every single Indo-European culture, all the way from India and Iran through to Greece, that you got these two classes of beings, the gods and the Titans, and they're at war with each other. The Hindus call them the Devas, gods, and Asuras, Titans. And Prometheus is a Titan, and they were older. The Titans were older. So Prometheus, as a Titan, rebels against his fellow Titans, and initially he helps Zeus come to power. He helps the Olympian order to be established because he thinks that these Olympians might be less tyrannical than Kronos, and the other Titans were. And he's very quickly disabused of this aspiration, of this hopeful, vision. And he sees that basically Zeus is as bad as Kronos. He's a serial rapist, sadist, manipulator, and
this goes back a long way. Hey,
exactly. So then Prometheus rebels against the Olympians, and he rebels in several ways. People are familiar with how Prometheus steals fire from the gods of Olympus and brings that to humanity, which symbolizes the light of scientific knowledge and the fire of the forge of technology, craft. Prometheus gifted man with all the crafts, the arts.
So it's symbolic of so the fire of Prometheus is symbolic of technology and man's use of it.
but not just of technology, and this is important, of craft. Techne is the Greek term. Craft in the sense that underlies both technology and art, right? The arts and crafts. And part of our problem socially today is that technology has become dissociated from aesthetics and from aesthetic intuition. We need a kind of technology of the type we were reaching for in the Renaissance, which is motivated by an artistic and poetic mentality again. And the consequently is not going to be dehumanizing, right? So Prometheus is, gave us the gift of the arts and the sciences and arts and crafts. And that's one way in which he rebelled, which people are quite familiar with. But Prometheus also rebelled when, so one thing some people may not be familiar with is that in Greek myth, Zeus is not the creator of mankind. Prometheus fashions humanity. So we are fashioned by Prometheus sort of in his own image. Go ahead. You were going to say something.
No. Go ahead. Keep going.
So, and then Zeus demands that the creature of Prometheus sacrifice to these Olympian gods. And one of the other acts of rebellion is that Prometheus sets up the rites of sacrifice in a way where, so basically the image here is that Zeus is shown two different forms of sacrifice, and one of them is like all the fat from a slaughtered animal covering a bunch of bones. And so because it's all like marbled fat, it's attractive, and Zeus says, yeah, I want this kind of sacrifice. And the other type is just, lean meat. And so basically, trickster that he is, Prometheus cons Zeus into taking the bones and the fat and leaving the nourishing portion of the animal for humanity, which is, again, just a symbol of the way in which this deity is trying to make it so that humanity is free from the need to worship any gods, to sacrifice anything to beings beyond mankind, right? And so you see this rebel and champion for humanity come through in various aspects of the Prometheus myth. But then we also have to think about what the very name of the figure means. Prometheus comes from the word Prometheia in Greek. And Prometheia means forethought, thinking ahead. And one of the reasons why Zeus chains Prometheus to the Caucasus and then has his liver pecked out by this eagle is because the liver was a symbol for fortune telling in Greek culture. The Greek, basically, soothsayers, prophets, oracles, whatever, they used the black liver by candlelight the way that people use tea leaves or something as a augury device. And so the liver is a symbol for knowledge of the future. And so Prometheus knows better than Zeus what may happen in the future. He has foresight, foreknowledge, forethought. And the eagle, which is a symbol of Zeus pecking his liver, is Zeus trying to know what Prometheus knows. Okay? So there's also this element of forethought. And when we're dealing, this is completely connected to Prometheus as a god of craft, because when we're dealing with technologies that are as disruptive and potentially catastrophic as genetic engineering, robotics, nanotechnology, we need to have forethought. We need to be able to think ahead of how to constructively integrate these technologies so we don't wind up being dehumanized into something like the Borg, in Star Trek, or so that we don't wind up with a Terminator-style future of machines dominating mankind. So that element of forethought is also very important from the myth of Prometheus.
So would you say that Prometheus, the concept of Prometheus and Prometheism as an alternative vision or an alternative path for humanity is because Prometheus and Techne represent the full flourishing of man's potential to be able to use all of his faculties, his psychic abilities, to be able to have the forethought or, the telepathic ability for me to be able to determine whether you're lying or not, And is that the way the alternative path could be traveled by humanity? Because the mechanistic worldview does not entertain or accept any concept that man can exist outside of this body. That it's we live, we die, we go to dust, and that's the end of it. Would you say that Prometheism, offers that alternative?
That was perfectly put. I couldn't have put that better myself.
Okay.
That really summarizes it. And just to add to that, the reason why. So, okay, you just mentioned man to be able to use all of his faculties, including cultivating the psychic ability that's atrophied in us, right? And by the way, these are completely connected to breakthroughs in singularity level technologies, as I've pointed out many times, both in interviews and in my writings. The closer we get to developing artificial intelligence, the more it's going to be impossible for these scientists at well-funded institutions like Stanford and MIT and Carnegie Mellon and all that to hide telepathy and psychokinesis and so forth. Because if you want to build a conscious computer, these abilities are properties of consciousness. Mm-hmm. And you're going to have serious R&D problems if you don't factor this in as you're trying to develop a conscious AI. Okay, so
because I think that's what you articulate this really well, is that one of the main motivations of the Enlightenment was to drive a wedge between parapsychology as a serious discipline for scientists to study into this lunatic fringe, as they like to call it, so that it's not a serious subject, or it's not well researched, it's not funded at all, at least for the public view. Would you say that is an important element of what happened with the Enlightenment, is to keep us away from that stuff?
Absolutely. And so, if we're going to have a mainstream recognition of parapsychology as legitimate science, and we're going to develop protocols for training parapsychological abilities on a large scale so that people can learn. I mean, right now, there are a lot of people who came out of the SRI, the U.S. Defense Department, and CIA remote viewing program that are offering remote viewing training. You mentioned to me that you did some of that yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I did an episode with a guy called Gary Fong, which we discussed the CIA document that was released by Freedom of Information by mistake. I don't know, but that document is really profound. It was, for me, it was like, okay, this is serious. The CIA take it serious. This document is a subordinate reporting to his superior. They spent $25 million, at least that's what they admit publicly. So they believed it worked. And they tell us that research into, psychic abilities and psychic soldiers all of a sudden just ended. I don't believe that in the slightest. And yet I've had personal, direct experience of remote viewing that worked for me, and it blew my mind. So trying to conceptualize what that means to humanity, that these abilities are inherent in us all. You don't need to be specifically talented. You just have to put a bit of effort in and a bit of practice. I mean, that surely is the ultimate revolution, or the next big revolution. That and maybe this idea of transhumanism is a distraction, is a decoy, is an attempt to pull humanity to this artificial psychic ability through being connected to the internet as one species, and having chips put in our brains to keep us away from the real technology, the natural technology.
But here's the problem, Laurence. There's a very good reason why they keep all this stuff secret. I'm talking about the remote viewing and other psychokinesis research and so forth. The last time that we had a legal and political system that acknowledged these human abilities, there were the witch burnings. Okay? Mm-hmm. If you look, we had a legal and political system that recognized telepathy and clairvoyance and psychokinesis and all that. They didn't use those terms. They used different terms, scholastic terminology. But we had a legal system that recognized all that. And what did we get? We got people being accused of hexing people, of starting fires with their minds, and so forth. And the end result were mass executions of suspected witches and sorcerers, including someone of the stature of Giordano Bruno, who was, burned in a public market in Rome.
Was he burnt at the stake for those reasons? Was because he was developing psychokinesis abilities?
They always come up with way trumped up charges for things, but the main reason why the church found him threatening was that he was developing a form of science that would incorporate a knowledge of these things. That's exactly why they saw him as a threat. He was burned as a sorcerer, ultimately, as an alchemist, Promethean alchemist. And by the way, there's a great book on this called what the hell? I think it's called Promethean Alchemy, something to that effect. No, Promethean Ambition, and it's about alchemy in the Renaissance and late Middle Ages, and how it has a Promethean spirit and so forth. In any case, my point is that if we look, you're painting a kind of contrast between the dehumanizing effects of materialist transhumanism and then our potentially more positive cultivation of latent psychic abilities. But if you really think about it, that's as fraught with danger. If we develop on a large scale telepathy, clairvoyance, telekinesis, we're going to be in a society where anyone can get into anybody else's thoughts. You can spy on what someone's doing in halfway across the world in their bedroom. Okay, so there's a total violation of privacy, not just spatial privacy, but the privacy of your own thoughts. And then when it comes to telekinesis or psychokinesis, it's been shown you can make somebody's heart stop or give them a stroke. This can be done. The Soviets used to take people down in submarines and carry out psychokinesis tests on animals, on laboratory animals. They would kill mice using.
Well, it's like the many stare at goats, isn't it? The whole movie was. Even though that was a derogatory film.
No, I know the guy who it's based on. Lynn Buchanan. Yeah. Anyway, look. So I don't want to get into too many details, but that movie was based all on events that actually took place. It was fictionalized, but the main characters in that film are composites of actual people who worked for the CIA and DOD, and they did this kind of stuff. So yeah, you can stare a goat dead, and the problem is that means you can stare your neighbor dead or your boss at work or whatever, and this presents a legal and political nightmare.
So they're censoring this technology, man's latent ability to do these things, because it's for our own benefit, because we can't, look after ourselves as such. Is there a period in human history where these abilities, this full faculty of human potential, was already realized, like maybe Atlantis?
Yes, and it ended with an utter catastrophe. I think this is a whole other interview. We could do a whole other stuff.
Sure.
But in a nutshell, and there is an important point to be made here that's relevant to Prometheism. And I discuss Atlantis a lot in at least 2 or 3 of my books. The Atlantean society was not just a victim of some natural catastrophe. If you look at what Steiner, what Edgar Cayce wrote about Atlantis, these people turned their minds on one another. There was a catastrophic psychic war that took place in Atlantis that was part of the destruction of that civilization. And people have shown, even in a contemporary context, there was this guy, Ted Owens, for example, in the 70s. People have shown that you can use large-scale psychokinesis to produce weather effects and tectonic effects. And so it's possible that this natural catastrophe that did in Atlantis was not entirely natural, that it was, in some part telekinetic or something, okay? And it was connected to the psychic war that took place in that society. In any case, the reason why, since we went on this tangent for a minute of Atlantis, the reason why it's relevant to Prometheism is that one argument that a lot of people will throw back at me against what I'm advocating is that, humanity just needs time to evolve. We just, our ethics hasn't caught up with our level of scientific and technological development. And if we need to be regressed for a while so that our ethics can catch up with our technology, then it's worth going back to a more primitive form of society and cultivating our values so that maybe in another 1,000 years or 5,000 years or whatever, we can handle these technological innovations better. Well, bullshit, okay? We had it before. And 95% or more of human history has been hidden from us. Humanity is a vastly ancient species. There's abundance of evidence for that, including on the moon and on Mars. The remote you mentioned the remote viewing, session that the CIA did at the Monroe Institute. This is the document that you were referring to that was leaked. Well, they remote viewed human cities on Mars millions of years ago. And this remote viewing data that the CIA came up with has been confirmed by satellite photography that has been
Yeah.
satellite photography in the orbit of Mars that CIA and
Well,
other.
I've read Ingo Swann's book, Penetration, in which
Absolutely.
he was hired, to remote view the moon, and the stuff he was reporting back about what's going on in the moon is like, oh, but this is probably an actually really big tangent that we're going down here. But
Yeah.
so if we weave it back, if one of the reasons why this technology has been held back from humanity is because of its inherent dangers, or so we think, is how can we move forward with Prometheism as a viable alternative to Schwab's transhumanist agenda?
Right. So how did we go off onto this tangent in the first place? We were talking about Prometheus.
Yeah.
And why is Prometheus important? Well, Prometheus is important. Okay, in other words, why am I not just some atheistic communistic thinker or atheistic, whatever, anarcho-capitalist thinker or whatever brand of atheist, humanist? Yeah. Why don't I just speak in a kind of theologically neutral discourse, right? Why is Prometheus important? Why have I put forward a movement, not to say an ideology, that's a contraction of the words Prometheus or Promethea, the defining quality of Prometheus, and theism, right? Prometheism, like atheism, Prometheus. Why? Because unless we embody the ethos of Prometheus, unless we can internalize the various facets of this archetype, including its ethical facets, we are going to face this catastrophe if we attempt to press forward with the spectral revolution as part of the technological singularity. If, as part of the technological singularity, we have a mainstream recognition of parapsychology and we're able to cultivate these latent abilities, we are going to face an utter catastrophe unless we have a different ethical fiber. And we need a single point of orientation to build an ethical society around. We need an orienting ethos, okay? A new God, as it were. Toward the end of his life, Martin Heidegger said that the scale of the challenge that we face from modern technology is such that, quote, only a God can save us now, unquote. And in my early work, Prometheus and Atlas, I picked up on various references he made in certain speeches, like his rectoral address when he became the head of Freiburg University, and other places where Heidegger basically led on that he believed that God, that spirit, God lowercase g, that could save us from the dehumanizing effects of technology is the God of technology. Think about this for a minute, right? It's okay. So Heidegger said you can't just sidestep this. You can't get around it. You can't be like these traditionalists who just want to go back to nature, the Ted Kaczynski, kind of approach. Technology or technological science, technoscience, has to be transformed from within its own essence so that we go back to that Promethean impulse that was meant to be, an affirmation of both our artistic and our scientific ability, right? Techne in the sense of arts and crafts, in the sense of science and the arts. We need that aesthetic intuition in order to guide technological development so that it's empowering and not dehumanizing. So Prometheus is that archetype around which we need to restructure our society. And if you want, we can sort of make a transition to talking about the more political dimensions of this.
Well, I think it's we've discussed the theoretical framework for Prometheism and why we need it. I guess a good transition would be, how do we achieve this in the real world? What's the plan of action to take Prometheism from the head, into the world?
So here, another of the concepts that I've developed is really relevant. And that's the idea of a world state of emergency. You had this legal theorist in 1920s, 30s Germany, Carl Schmitt, who elaborated a concept of the state of emergency as something that reveals the nature of political sovereignty. And, to trivialize Schmitt, oversimplify him, basically, he pointed to the fact that in a state of emergency, it could be an earthquake, a hurricane like Katrina in the United States, or a political emergency like the outbreak of war. Not like in the United States, okay, because we've been free from Syria, but like, during the Blitz in Britain, right? In any emergency, you see that it's not the written constitution that really determines the structure of a political system and that holds a state together, okay? Like, look at the written constitution we wrote for the Iraqis. It wasn't worth the paper that it was written on, okay?
But the American Constitution seems to be the main target of the communist, takeover. It seems that they're obsessed with destroying the American Constitution, which kind of implies it stands for something.
Well, and it will be destroyed, and I'll tell you why it will be destroyed. Because what Carl Schmitt pointed out was that in a state of emergency, you see that a constitution is only as good as a sovereign who embodies the principles that it was based on. So a constitution is a formal transcription or formulation of a deeper ethos that has to be embodied by a sovereign. Now, a sovereign could be a president or a king, but a sovereign could also be a council or even a whole parliament if a parliament can act very quickly and effectively.
But the English Parliament is sovereign. So Parliament, sovereignty in England resides not in the royal family, it resides in Parliament.
Carl Schmitt would say, if and only if the members of Parliament still have an ethos that is consonant with the spirit of the people and that they can govern effectively in a state of emergency based on that ethos, which in the case of Britain, I would say that's no longer the case. So therefore...
Absolutely. They clearly can't manage a state of emergency because we're in one.
Exactly. So COVID-19 was a perfect exposure of all... I mean, COVID-19 is a perfect example of what Carl Schmitt was talking about. Okay, so in a state of emergency, it becomes clear that sovereignty lies not in a written constitution, but in the sovereign's embodiment of the ethos of the people. And this is why Schmitt argued against world government. He said that you can't have a world government because there's no world ethos. We've got all these different religions in the world, all these different cultures. I mean, the Confucian culture and the Islamic culture are completely different from one another. Both of them are completely different from our Western civilizational ethos, right? And there's a whole question about whether the Russians have their own distinct Orthodox civilization and whether they're at odds with the West on a cultural level. So you have all these different civilizations. And, according to Carl Schmitt, you can't have a world sovereign because there's not going to be any leadership that embodies some ethos that's common to the entire planet. And so any attempt to say that, there's going to be global governance like the United Nations or, that NATO somehow even speaks for some large portion of the world, it's con artistry, it's coercion. To speak in the name of humanity, really what you're doing, Carl Schmitt said, is you're dehumanizing everybody who doesn't agree with your ethos. And so this is what he argued. And so therefore he was a nationalist, right? And he was against globalism. But here's the problem, is that toward the end of his life, it occurred to Schmitt in his last book, A Theory of the Partisan, he's looking at the miniaturization of nuclear weapons, and he's looking at astronauts now being in the orbit of the Earth, and he's putting two and two in together and figuring, holy shit, they could put nuclear weapons on the moon. And there could be a war directed on the Earth from space. And technology is now getting to a point where the whole of humanity is threatened. So another aspect of his concept of the political is that the sovereign is also the one who decides on who the enemy is. Part of what defines state sovereignty is the sovereign's power to define the enemy and to decide who the friends of a state are. Okay? And there can't be a planetary government, he originally argued, because there's no enemy of all of humanity. There's no threat to all of humanity. Well, Advanced technology changes that. And Schmidt started to realize this at the end of his life, that actually the convergence of certain advanced technologies, and here I start to further Schmidt's argument with a view to singularity technologies, the convergence of certain technologies poses a fundamental threat to humanity as a whole and creates a political sphere, a properly political sphere in Schmidt's sense, that encompasses the whole planet. And so we are now faced, when you look at the technological singularity and the spectral revolution, because, there's no geographic limit to telepathy or telekinesis either. Both the American CIA and the Soviet parapsychology researchers showed this during the Cold War. That's the whole point of developing clairvoyance for espionage, is that you can see what the hell's going on in Siberia, right? Or take out the jugular vein of, whatever Soviet politician on the other side of the planet using telekinesis. And so the technological singularity and the spectral revolution that's integral to it mean that we need a world sovereign. And this is very disturbing.
So the Great Reset and transhumanism requires a world sovereign in order for it to be completed and successful.
Listen, to hell with the Great Reset people. I certainly am not aligned with them. And to hell with the materialist transhumanists. I'm not aligned with them either. But what I'm saying is that unless we want to be regressed to a pre-modern society where all these technologies are taken away from us and we're put in a kind of feudal system where religious superstition and ignorance are enforced so that we don't ask about telepathy and telekinesis and all that, and it's the devil's work, which is what they, and if anyone goes too deep into it, they're burned at the stake again, right? Unless we want to wind up in that kind of society, like the evangelicals in America want.
So you're saying we need a world sovereign?
That's right.
Okay,
That's
right. I understand.
And so what I'm doing with Prometheism is setting forth the archetype of Prometheus as the basis for a global ethos, for a kind of, you could call it religious humanism, where the humanistic archetype that guides the development of our ethical fabric on a global scale is the archetype of Prometheus and the various characteristics that has. Prometheus, the creator of humanity, right? Prometheus, who wants to empower humanity not to be in a servile position to any gods above himself. And so, world state of emergency, right? What Carl Schmitt started to realize toward the end of his life and didn't have time to complete the thought, which I'm completing in my work, is that for the first time, we are faced with a state of emergency that's not specific to one or another country or even one or another civilization. We have a world state of emergency. And this world state of emergency, the state of emergency of global scope, also demands the formation of a world state. And in this sense, I'm aligned with the communists. So people have branded me a Nazi, a fascist, this, that, whatever, Look, it's a load of crap. I have as much in common in some ways with Marx as I do with anyone on the right. I do think that technological, industrial development and so forth ultimately does require a unification of humanity on a socio-political level, because the challenges that we face in navigating these technological developments are global. They're universal. And so
how would you
Prometheus?
How would you select the sovereign? Would the sovereign be an individual, or would the sovereign be a council, or would it be the individual? Is humanity realizing his own personal sovereignty part of the struggle? Is that we're very willing to hand over our sovereignty, aren't we, to other people, other institutions, and with it, our freedom at the same time? I mean, can we define world sovereign a little bit deeper?
So, look, I'm very sympathetic to the anarchist idea of each individual as his own sovereign, right? I mean, that's ideal. I really, that would be the real utopia.
Well, that would be my position, but yes. So go on. So how do we,
Laurence? Here's the problem. Okay, while I'm deeply sympathetic to that, and I resonate with a person who has that as their ideal, I'm also a radical pragmatist, and I recognize the problem of how we're actually going to get from where we are right now to any kind of freer society while integrating these technologies and not allowing ourselves to be forcibly regressed and deindustrialized the way that the people who manufactured COVID-19 want us to be forcibly regressed and deindustrialized. Okay. So I go back to how Carl Schmitt defined sovereignty, right? So on the one hand, I've got this Marxist vision of, how humanity needs to be unified. But on the other hand, I think Carl Schmitt was absolutely right about the nature of sovereignty. Sovereignty only means anything if it's effective. To be sovereign means that in a state of emergency, in a state of exception to the written constitution where the legal order is suspended, it can't function, okay?
Yeah.
Who calls the shots? What orders do they give? How can it be implemented, right? Sovereignty is a functional concept.
But so that's what I always thought. The weakness of anarchy, true classical anarchy, and personal sovereignty within that framework is that what happens when you're threatened by a group bigger than you? You have to fall back upon a hierarchical structure in order to be able to defeat the threat, which takes you away from what we would imagine as classical anarchy. I mean, maybe classical anarchy as personal sovereignty is a position to hold when we're in peaceful times. Yeah, but when we're like you're saying, is that we're currently being coerced into a technological pen. Once we're in it, there's no escape for maybe a millennia. Who knows if ever? So, are you saying that because of that existential threat, is that we have to form a structure, a hierarchy headed by a sovereign in order to be able to, defend that position and even overthrow those seeking to enslave us?
Yes, but see, it's not just a question of an external enemy. Definitely the external threat is something that anarchists never consider, right? I mean, for example, anarchists, you never find them considering how if let's say somehow we all found a way to peacefully coexist, right? And we dismantled the state on planet Earth. Well, you think there's no other intelligent life out there in the universe? And what are you going to do when we're attacked by denizens of another planet? Oh, you think that somehow ethical, values are definitely scaled to technological progress so that anyone out there with, faster than light speed technology is going to be all ethical and they're not going to come here to exploit us? Get real. Is that how technological progress worked on the Earth? The most technologically sophisticated regimes on Earth have been the most brutal regimes in history. Okay? We got most of our modern technology from Nazi Germany. It's a dirty secret of the United States. The Nazis took us to the moon. America did not go to the moon. The Nazis went to the moon from Texas and Florida. Okay? So the most brutal regimes, including Stalinist Soviet Union, were the most technologically advanced regimes. And so this is a fallacy that there couldn't be a hostile alien species that would come here and threaten us from the outside. That's a big problem for anarchism. But the other thing that you're neglecting in that characterization is that we don't even need an external threat for there to be a problem with the anarchist political theory. These disruptive technologies need to be managed. We are facing a situation where we could have some kind of an artificial intelligence emerge from out of cyberspace. And with all these systems increasingly being automated, including our weapons systems, who knows what this thing might do to humanity on the planet? And so,
well, it's been predicted, isn't it? With Terminator and Skynet, and
right.
Even the Matrix, which is kind of a continuation of the same line of thought.
That's right. So if genetic engineering and nanotechnology and robotics and all that start to be organized by an intelligence that's not human, okay, that's a threat to all of humanity. And so how are you going to effectively govern these rapidly advancing technologies unless you have an incredibly intelligent governing class in a certain command structure, not to call it a hierarchy, but a functional chain of command and organization to be able to manage these technologies to help them empower us without dehumanizing us. Okay, and so therefore, you do need a structure of sovereign authority.
Because I think the last big technological revolution was the Industrial Revolution, which definitely catapulted man into a new phase of existence, but it came at great personal suffering for the people at the bottom and completely dehumanized the workers who were, put into workhouses. And it feels like this is a new industrial revolution. I mean, imagine trying to stop the last industrial revolution. You have no chance. It was something that was all powerful, and once it was moving, there was no stopping it. It was a force of nature in a sense. And I feel as if that's what's happening now, is that this is happening whether we like it or not, right? This technical revolution. So what do we do? Do we just go along with it? Or like you say, do we take control and try and harness it for a more ethical, humane instincts?
Well, one huge difference with the Industrial Revolution is that, look, there were two competing models of how to handle the Industrial Revolution: capitalism and communism. They were both hyper-industrial. But what they both had in common is that capitalism and communism were trying to organize resource distribution in a scarcity economy. At the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, throughout the Industrial Revolution, you had to organize labor based on a limited production capacity. This is going to completely change with nanotechnology and robotics. There is no reason why there needs to be poverty a generation from now. Nobody should need to be poor in the world. We have the capacity with nanotechnology and robotics to produce an industry of abundance, okay, to more than meet the needs of everybody on the planet.
So would that bring an end to? Would that bring an end to these archaic ideas of capitalism and communism? If capitalism and communism were a dialectic for the Industrial Revolution, and it seems that they're outdated now. Yeah,
absolutely. There was this thinker in the 70s called FM Esfandiari, Feridun Esfandiari, who later renamed himself FM 2030. And while I don't subscribe by any means to all of what he said, he did have this one constructive idea of upwingers rather than left-wingers or right-wingers. We should be upwingers who embrace the power of technological developments to produce an industry and economy of abundance where there's no poverty. So there's no need for communist resource redistribution in a situation like that. But it also means the end of capitalism. It's a kind of self-deconstruction of capitalism through abundant industry. And you don't have any drudgery anymore. All the work that no human being wants to do is done by robots and by automated systems. So what I'm saying is that we have this tremendous potential ahead of us. And we're not going to be allowed to get there by the elites that are currently in control. They do not want us to get there. But here's the thing, is that, okay, there's all kinds of avaricious and egotistical reasons why they don't want us to get there, because they want to maintain their own power. And, feudal power has a certain seduction to, for somebody's ego. All right. And a lot of these people are just sadists. So there's all that. But, they also have a certain legitimate reason why they're worried about humanity getting there, because frankly, the vast majority of people are not even close to being morally responsible enough to handle singularity level technologies. They're just not. I'll give you one example. 0-point energy. 0-point energy already exists. It's being suppressed. It's existed for decades. All kinds of reports were coming out in the 1950s from the U.S. aerospace industry. This is covered in a book called The Hunt for 0 Point, Nick Cook. And I discuss it in my writings as well. The aerospace industry in the Anglosphere in the 1950s made some kind of breakthrough in electrogravitic technology. And this would allow us to basically, use anti-gravity to move all across the planet as a basis for transportation without the need for any non-renewable energy resource, whether it's oil or coal or gas or whatever, right? So it's essentially free energy. You're tapping the 0-point energy quantum potential field in a system that produces more energy than needs to be put back into it. And it involves a kind of electrogravitic system, magnetism, and certain isotopes of mercury and thorium and so forth. But here's the problem. Just like with nuclear weapons, you have nuclear energy and nuclear bombs. And if you take that same 0-point energy technology and you weaponize it, there's enough energy in a coffee cup's worth of this material to vaporize the oceans of the planet. or to take out an entire continent. So the same, people have these propane tanks in their backyards and stuff, right, for heating in the winter. If you had the equivalent of a propane tank on your property that's a zero-point energy device, you could power anything you want, including your transportation vehicle, whatever, your home, indefinitely without any charge. It's free energy. But if someone uses the robots that they also have working in their house and their, various intelligent computer systems to help them weaponize that propane tank equivalent of a zero-point energy device, that person can, on his own initiative, blow up a whole continent. That's the problem.
So that's, it's a motivation to keep it secret and under wraps, isn't it? Because if people don't have the ability to control themselves with world-destroying weapons, then maybe it's a positive thing to keep them out of the hands of spoiled children.
Well, but here's the problem, Laurence, is that if you really study technological advancement, you see that it's deeply convergent. This is a point that I've made in many of my writings, in Prometheism and other books, is that the more advanced artificial intelligence gets, the easier genetic engineering is, because there's all these secondary and tertiary functions of genes that we don't understand. So before we go screwing around with splicing the human genome, we need to know all the different functions of a gene, because we might go to shut something off and not realize that it has some other function too, right? Mm-hmm. So as AI gets more powerful, it can map the human genome more effectively. And then we get the capacity to, let's say, enhance our IQ using genetic engineering. And people with those enhanced IQs can make breakthroughs in artificial intelligence that we wouldn't have thought of without an enhanced IQ.
How far away do you think the technological singularity really is? I mean, is it going to be in our lifetimes or
20 years?
20 years, yeah.
But my point is, you see, these are mutually reinforcing technologies. They're convergent. And at a certain point, the closer you get to the technological singularity, the more deeply convergent they are. So, for example, you cannot have large-scale IQ enhancement using genetic engineering, or you cannot have artificial intelligence without also having zero-point energy. They can hide it now because people aren't, on average, smart enough to go figure it out independently. But 10 to 15 years from now, if we got, CRISPR-enhanced IQ people running around in China or wherever, and, we've got AI systems that are helping people come up with new energy technology designs, they're going to reverse engineer this. Zero-point energy is going to become an open source public design. And so, the problem again is, how are we going to manage that? You need to create a society where no one would think to misuse such technology.
So how do you win? Currently, people who are populists in the true sense of the word, or dissidents, have very, very little political power, a voice that is increasingly stamped out by a technological totalitarian state. How can we organize in such a world to be able to create a political movement? I don't even know whether political activism is worth doing anymore. I mean, what are the actual methods that we can use in order to bring about change in our favor? Or do we just ride this wave and see where it ends up?
We certainly shouldn't just ride the wave and see where it ends up, okay? But I also don't think that populism is an answer, to say the least. The vast majority of people either subscribe to some retarded religious ideology, or they're materialists, atheists, materialists. And I don't know where you want to put the Chinese Confucianists. Maybe they're somewhere in between the two. Their ideology is retarded. Confucianism is extremely regressive, paternalistic, inimical to change and progress. And maybe you could also say that in a certain way it's kind of atheistic, although Confucius also had a certain idea of, the mandate of heaven and, celestial order and whatever. Okay, but anyway, point being, the vast majority of people do not appear to be able to embrace a Promethean ethos. And I haven't argued really here because we have a very constrained time span, but as I've indicated, I think that a Promethean ethos is the only kind of point of orientation that will allow us to navigate this challenge of the technological singularity and the spectral revolution effectively. And so what I'm concerned about is protecting people who are capable of embodying the Promethean ethos. And I don't care what class they come from, what country they come from, what culture or race or background they come from. The challenge is a global challenge. It faces humanity as a whole. And so what I think we need to do is to develop a decentralized, global political movement that unifies people who are like-minded and who are interested in cultivating this ethos and ultimately building a socio-political system on the basis of it. And there are ways to use the global kind of like circulatory system that we already have to accomplish that. But it's not through party politics.
No, party politics is a total waste of time, isn't it? You know, we've seen near enough all of the elections in the West are rigged. You know, there is no democracy. I don't even think I'm a fan of democracy, to be honest. Yeah, it seems that the political route is just a dead end. So if there's no political solution.
Well, there is a political solution. You have to redefine what political means, though. Political is not limited to party politics, right? The elites that really govern us, they don't think in terms of party politics. They use party politics in order to control us. But their concept of the political transcends party politics. Ours also has to.
Do you think that the elites that run the show are adepts and have the craft of parapsychology, and that's the realms that they're operating in, which is why they're able, because some of the projects that these people seem to be involved in are generational, and it's like, you know, you can work on something now in this lifetime that you will never see the fruition of because it's over hundreds of years. So I can't see the human motivation to be involved in projects such as those unless there is a bigger, grandiose idea above and beyond what we can perceive with our five senses. You know, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I think that at the highest level, okay, so there's different tiers of elites, right? People, populists, they collapse, they pancake the whole thing, they collapse into, the elite. No, it's not like that, okay? There's all different layers and levels of it, and the lie is different at every level, okay? So when Dick Cheney was sitting in the Pentagon on the morning of 9/11, telling the, lieutenants around him to lower the air defense systems of the Pentagon so that thing could come in and strike the building, Dick Cheney is told that he's doing this for a certain reason. He's been given this whole bullshit narrative that has to do with America reestablishing hegemony and we need Islam as a new enemy after the fall of the Soviet Union. He's got all this crap that he thinks justifies his actions. Well, that's a lie that's convenient for controlling Dick Cheney. There's other lies at other higher levels. And I think at the highest level, you're absolutely right. There are people who have a very long, not just long-term vision, they have an endurance that's on a scale that's much greater than ours. And they do have parapsychological abilities. And they've been controlling things behind the scenes for a very long time. And one of the reasons, again, that I frame this movement in terms of Prometheus is that I think this highest elite is very much what the mythological notion of the Olympian gods is based on. They see themselves as gods over humanity. And they would like to put us back in a servile position, okay, that of the kind we had in pre-industrial society.
So do you think that humanity has, or they think that humanity has too much freedom for their liking? They want to regress us back to a more feudal, state in which we were just peasants?
Yeah, we're very close to overthrowing them, and we can overthrow them. And they're very afraid of it.
How do you think we can overthrow them?
We can overthrow them by successfully navigating the challenges of the technological singularity and cultivating these latent psychic abilities and becoming equals of theirs in terms of our capacities.
Becoming the Übermensch.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
On an individual level, maybe that's what personal sovereignty really is become the Übermensch in order to be able to fight for yourself, your family, and everybody else on the spectral plane.
That's the end goal. That is my end goal with Prometheism. My end goal, Prometheism is not some cult of Prometheus, like Prometheus is Enki or some bullshit that like we have this ancient Greek god and we're going to organize some cult around. No, 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 no. Prometheism is about each of us becomes Prometheus. We become gods in our own right. It's about, it's a form of ultra humanism is really what it is. Okay. Where ultimately we become sovereign individuals and live in a society of mutual recognition of our sovereign individuality. But the question is, how do we get there, right? And so what I was suggesting is that rather than party politics, we need to be able to hijack the existing global technological mechanisms that the elite set up and that they use very effectively, right? So, for example, one way they're controlling the world right now is through the World Wide Web. The World Wide Web layer of the internet is a system of mass social control, which has gotten even worse with social media, the various social media platforms. It's a giant brainwashing mechanism. But there's a deeper layer of the internet. There's a layer of the internet that was created by the Defense Department, the ARPANET, and it was built to withstand a nuclear war. That's the reason why it was set up, to be able to exchange scientific and technical information in the event that there was a nuclear war. So the deeper layer of the internet is much more resilient than the World Wide Web. And there are certain emerging technologies like blockchain that allow you to set up autonomous networks using only the deeper strata of the internet that are not at all dependent on the World Wide Web and that are unsurveillable. They are impervious to surveillance. These blocks, certain blockchain networks that can be engineered, and they can become mediums of exchange for all kinds of, not just information, but things. And there's also a tremendous potential in terms of cryptocurrency as a medium of exchange in these blockchain networks. So you can imagine a decentralized global communications and exchange system that would start to set up an alternate world economy and a society that's impervious to surveillance. And then there's a further problem, though, because as soon as you start to set up something like that, the various intelligence agencies are going to get wise to it. And even if it's impervious to especially if it's impervious to their surveillance, well, they're going to come after you.
Yeah.
And it's not, go ahead.
No. Yeah. So crypto, you see crypto, the blockchain technology as humanity enhancing rather than dehumanizing technology, because Bitcoin. I've done quite a bit of research into Bitcoin. I find it a fascinating subject, especially the fact that nobody knows who created it. I think that's part of the amazing mystery and story of Bitcoin. And from the stuff I read, I got very, very excited and enthused about the potential to destroy probably the controlling structure of this elite transhumanist, whatever we want to call it, is the banking system, the central banking system. I think because that controls the whole show, because all policy is economic, right? So if you control the economics, you control all policy. And I hope, I pray that, Bitcoin is what it's promised to be, that it's a direct, decentralized attack upon the banking system. There's obviously other people that think it's just another scam, right? And they've got an interesting argument, an interesting case. But what are your thoughts on how Bitcoin could be central to helping something like Prometheism come to pass?
Bitcoin will be appropriated by the elites. It is currently being appropriated by the elites. And cryptocurrency in and of itself is not a solution. It could be used to impose a digital currency on the world that would be even more coercive than the kinds of currency systems that we have, and that would be scaled to a kind of social credit system of the type that China is developing. So it's not as if crypto is inherently the solution, or Bitcoin in particular is the solution, but there are ways to use the crypto technology to develop a type of currency that really could not be appropriated. And there, I don't want to get into more detail, because then we start to get into tactical and operational matters, right? Yeah. And but my point is this: that using the deeper structures of the internet for communication and exchange an exchange involving a type of cryptocurrency that makes an unsurveillable market possible and starts to actually develop an economy and potentially an industry. When you consider 3D printing and so on and so forth, an economy and an industry that is autonomous and outside of the existing system, that is key as a form of political organization and resistance. But then, as I was saying, you're going to be targeted at that point by all kinds of interests, corporate interests, national intelligence agencies, and so on and so forth. And so one thing that's also necessary, unfortunately, is going to be defense. And there the model is Blackwater, I'm sorry to say. Okay? There are all kinds of militias in the United States, and there's no reason why religious nutcases and all kinds of people with other retarded ideologies should be the ones that are armed to the teeth and have private militias. If we develop a global system of communication and exchange that is devoted to forming a Promethean community ultimately in the future, we need the capacity to protect it in really tangible terms. And of course, the difference from an organization like Blackwater is that they were mercenaries who would do all kinds of jobs for all kinds of questionable people. I'm not talking about mercenaries who were for hire. I'm talking about people who would be a defense mechanism for this system. But then ultimately, nothing can replace community building institutions that do things like unfold new models for education. And here I think the model of anthroposophy is very important. I have all kinds of problems with Rudolf Steiner as a thinker. I have big differences with Rudolf Steiner as a philosopher or spiritual leader, whatever you want to call him. But I think that Steiner, with the kind of community that he set up in the anthroposophy movement in the 1920s, showed us a really interesting model for how to develop new education systems, new models for agriculture, and basically community building in general around a new ethos.
That's a brilliant idea. I think because I'm a fan of Steiner. I listen to a lot of his lectures on YouTube, and some of the ideas he has are just like, how does one man have so many incredible forward-seeing ideas in one lifetime? And I can only presume that he was an adept at parapsychology, and he was able to tap into the collective unconscious, or the complete technological inventions of the universe through he calls Akashic records. I think I think he's a really, really, really interesting character. And would you say he embodies the idea of Prometheism? Is he somebody that is a Prometheist?
No. So as I said, I have some significant problems with Steiner, and that's a whole conversation in and of itself. There are Promethean aspects of his thinking. There are also aspects of his thinking that are not very Promethean. But I think one important thing in philosophy is that you need to be able to separate form from content. And the form of what Steiner did, the form of it, irrespective of the content, is the right form for how we need to sociopolitically organize. Okay, so the way anthroposophy built communities in Europe in the 1920s, which was so effective that the Nazis said, this is our greatest enemy. They went and they burned the Gothenaeum down, and they basically waged a war against anthroposophy, saying that it's either going to be us or the Steinerians, right? Mm-hmm. That kind of effectiveness in terms of the formal structure of anthroposophy is a model that we can look to, but then it needs to be combined with this blockchain technology that builds from out of the deeper, more resilient substructure of the internet, a type of cryptocurrency that allows for exchange inside that system, exchange that's unsurveillable. And then ultimately, you do need a kind of defense mechanism in terms of an organization like Blackwater.
That's always the biggest problem, isn't it, with any new societies, like you just described with Steiner's. Ultimately, the Nazis used their aggression and their weaponry to be able to close it down. And that's always the problem: is how do you defend what you build? How do you build the militia? How do you have self-determination? How do you become a nation in your in its own right, where you can seek the protection from other nations around you. I mean, that's always the biggest challenge: is how do you get the guns?
Well, Lucifer, bless his soul, Rudolf Steiner never formed a militia, and
Mm.
he might have, been well advised to do so. When you have enemies like the Nazis, you better get real in terms of defending what you built.
Well, he didn't live long, did he, Rudolf Steiner? He died at 64. Allegedly, he was poisoned. I don't know if that's
I wouldn't
true.
be at all surprised.
Yeah, because he didn't look well, did he, towards the end? He looked like a really ill guy. But some of the information that he was able to bring, I think is quite amazing. What are your thoughts on that, though, on Steiner? Let's just finish up on Steiner, because I really like him as an interesting character. What are your thoughts on his psychic ability? Because he's up there with Edgar Cayce, isn't he, in terms of some of the visions of
an adept. Steiner was definitely a psychic adept, no question about it. My problems with Steiner are philosophical and theological. I think that he tried to salvage too much of Christianity, and the whole system he sets up in terms of Christ versus Ahriman and Lucifer and so on. I think it's deeply problematic.
Contrived.
Yeah, it's deeply problematic.
And what about his work on like the Rosicrucians? Because I find them to be a really interesting order. I mean, where do you see them fitting into this story? Are they on the side of the elite, or are they?
They were the good guys back in the day.
Yeah.
See, the thing is, a lot of these institutions have been corrupted. The Rosicrucians were the good guys back in the day. Rene Descartes, I was mentioning earlier, was an agent of the Holy Inquisition. He was a Jesuit spy, and in particular, Descartes' main target as an intelligence agent was the Rosicrucian order. He was tasked to infiltrate the Rosicrucian order. He developed all kinds of friendships inside the Rosicrucian order, and he basically fed information back to the Vatican to screw over these poor Rosicrucians. They were the good guys. They were the Prometheans of their time. And I think we need to see, the thing is, we can't look back to institutions. Like, it makes no sense whatsoever to call yourself a Rosicrucian today. Right? It's antiquarian. If the Rosicrucian leaders were alive today, the ones from Descartes' time, they would not be calling themselves Rosicrucians or trying to defend this particular mystical philosophy that they set forth in that era, right? I mean, they would be at the vanguard right now. If those particular people were living now, which they're living now, but living in different forms as different people, they would be pushing the envelope in our time.
So Prometheism is like as an updated Rosicrucianism.
Absolutely.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, I got to the nut of it in the end.
You got the nut of it. Yeah. You cracked the nut.
Yeah. Okay. Well, listen. I think we're winding up now. Been great talking to you. I could talk to you all day.
Likewise.
What have you? Have you got anything you'd like to finish on?
I think that was cracking that nut was a good thing to finish on. I think we should just let that simmer in people's minds.
Okay. Well, Jason, it's been a real pleasure chatting to you. I look forward to doing it again.
Likewise, Laurence.
Yeah, and I'll speak to you soon. Thanks very much, Jason, for coming on the show.
Take care.
Oh, Jason, sorry. Where can people find you online? I nearly forgot.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
Prometheism.com. I also have a personal website, jasonrezajorjani.com. So either Prometheism.com or jasonrezajorjani.com. They both have links to my YouTube, my social media accounts, and so forth. So they're hubs for everything else. My book.
Where can people buy your books?
Yeah, well, just go to jasonrezajorjani.com and click on books.
Okay.
And it'll go right to the Amazon pages for all the books.
Okay, cool. Well, I look forward to our next conversation. Until then, you take care of yourself, Jason. Enjoy New York City, and speak to you soon.
Thank you. It was a real pleasure, Laurence. Take care.